I could see it in their faces the moment I walked into that room, the flash of annoyance, the quick exchange of glances between my son and daughter-in-law. They hadn't expected me to overhear their vacation plans. "Mom, we didn't think you'd want to come," my son said, his voice dripping with false concern. "The trip might be too strenuous for someone your age." At 68, I wasn't exactly fragile, but in that moment, I realized I'd become invisible to my own family. What happened next? Well, let's just say they learned that Eleanor Davenport still had a few surprises left. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I've always been the kind of woman who made things work. When my husband Richard passed away 12 years ago, I didn't fall apart like everyone expected. Instead, I picked myself up and built a new life. Our oceanfront property in Cape Haven, a modest 3-bedroom cottage with weathered blue shutters that Richard and I had purchased as an investment 40 years ago, became my sanctuary. I lovingly restored every inch of it, turning it into a charming vacation rental that provided both income and purpose. My son Marcus and his wife Vanessa had initially protested when I decided to live alone. "Mom, you can't maintain that place by yourself," Marcus would say, his tone suggesting I was being stubborn rather than independent. But I managed just fine. I kept my books balanced, my garden flourishing, and found joy in hosting summer visitors who treasured the property as much as I did. The trouble began last spring when Marcus and Vanessa started dropping hints about using the beach house for an extended family vacation. It had become something of a tradition over the past few years. They would bring their 2 teenagers, Lily and Jason, along with Vanessa's parents and occasionally her brother's family. I always stepped aside during these weeks, renting a small apartment in town to give them space. It wasn't ideal, but I understood family needed time together. "We're thinking of doing 3 weeks this year instead of 2, Marcus mentioned during one of our Sunday phone calls. "The kids have longer breaks now, and Dad's company has been generous with vacation time." I paused, wooden spoon hovering over the pot of soup I was stirring. 3 weeks? That's quite a chunk of the summer rental season, Marcus. "Mom, it's not like you need the money," he replied with a laugh that felt dismissive rather than warm. "And it's our family tradition now." Our family. The words stung more than they should have. Somehow I'd become separate from our family in my son's mind. "Well, I suppose that would be fine," I said, swallowing my disappointment. "Just let me know the dates so I can make arrangements." What I didn't tell Marcus was that I'd been contemplating joining them this year. After more than a decade of giving them space, I longed to be part of those precious summer memories, to watch my grandchildren splash in the waves, to share morning coffee on the deck with family, to feel the warmth of belonging again. When the calendar turned to June, I decided to surprise them with my suggestion. I baked Marcus's favorite lemon pound cake and drove the 30 minutes to their suburban home, my heart light with anticipation. I still had my own key, so I let myself in, hearing voices from the dining room. I was about to call out when I caught fragments of their conversation. "Just easier if Mom isn't there," Marcus was saying. "You know how she is, always wanting things done her way." "I know," Vanessa responded, her voice lower but still clear. "And the kids don't really connect with her. They say she treats them like they're still in elementary school." My breath caught in my throat as I stood frozen in the hallway, cake balanced in my hands. "Plus, she's getting older," Marcus continued. "The stairs at the beach house are steep, and she's slowed down. Remember last Christmas when she couldn't keep up on our walk to see the lights? We can't plan our vacation around accommodating her." Limitations. "Have you told her she's not invited?" Vanessa asked. "Not in those words," Marcus replied with a sigh. "She assumes she'll stay in town like usual. I just haven't corrected her. It's easier this way." I must have made some small noise because suddenly the conversation stopped, and Marcus appeared in the doorway. His face registered shock, then guilt as he saw me standing there. "Mom, we didn't hear you come in." His eyes fell to the cake in my hands, then back to my face, which I knew must have betrayed my hurt. I straightened my shoulders, summoning the dignity that had carried me through far worse moments than this. "Clearly not," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I brought dessert, but I see I'm interrupting." Vanessa appeared beside him, her cheeks flushed. "Eleanor, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I interrupted, surprising myself with my directness. "You're planning your vacation at my beach house and discussing why I'm too old and bothersome to be included." Marcus had the decency to look ashamed. "Mom, that's not fair. We just thought that I'm too decrepit to climb stairs, too set in my ways to enjoy a family vacation, too boring for my grandchildren to tolerate." I placed the cake on the all table. "You know, Marcus, I survived losing your father. I renovated that beach house by myself. I've traveled to 12 countries since turning 60. But apparently, I'm too feeble to join a family vacation at my own property." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus and Vanessa exchanged uncomfortable glances, neither willing to meet my eyes directly. "Fine," I said finally. "I understand how you feel. I'll need the exact dates for your stay so I can make arrangements." Relief washed over their faces. They thought I was backing down, accepting my exclusion with grace. How little they understood me after all these years. "We were thinking July 10th through the 31st, Vanessa said, her voice overly bright, clearly trying to move past the awkwardness. I nodded, memorizing the dates. "I'll make note of it. Enjoy your afternoon." And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving the cake behind. The drive home was a blur of emotions, hurt giving way to anger, then to a steely determination that I hadn't felt in years. By the time I reached Cape Haven, the sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in fiery oranges and pinks that matched the burning resolve in my chest. I sat on my deck, watching the waves crash against the shore, and made a decision. For too long, I'd been shrinking myself to accommodate others' expectations of how an aging mother should behave. Quiet, unobtrusive, grateful for whatever scraps of attention came her way. Not anymore. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, I called my rental agent, Sophia, who had become a dear friend over the years. "I need to block out July 10th through the 31st, I told her. "The house won't be available for rental." "Your family vacation?" she asked, the smile evident in her voice. "Not exactly," I replied. "Just some personal plans." Next, I called my bank and made an appointment to review my accounts and investments. I spent the afternoon researching trips I'd always dreamed of taking but had postponed for one reason or another. By evening, I had booked a culinary tour of Italy, cooking classes in Tuscany, wine tasting in Piedmont, and a week exploring the Amalfi Coast. The departure date? July 10th. I didn't hear from Marcus for several days, which wasn't unusual. Our relationship had fallen into a predictable pattern over the years: dutiful Sunday calls, occasional family dinners, and the unspoken agreement that I wouldn't intrude too much on his busy life. What he didn't realize was how much I'd withdrawn to avoid being seen as a burden. When he finally called the following weekend, his voice was casual, as if our last encounter had never happened. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Vanessa's putting together some plans for the beach trip and wanted to know if we need to bring extra bedding for when her brother's family stays for the 3rd week." I took a deep breath. "I'm afraid there's been a change of plans, Marcus. The beach house won't be available during those dates after all." Silence then. "What do you mean not available?" "We already planned everything. Vanessa's parents booked their flights. I've decided to use the house myself during that time, I said, my voice calm but firm. But, he sputtered, we always use it in July. It's tradition. Your tradition, I corrected gently. Not mine. And it's my house, Marcus. Mom, this is ridiculous. Is this because of what you overheard? We weren't trying to exclude you? Yes, you were, I interrupted. And that's your prerogative. But it's also my prerogative to use my property as I see fit. His tone changed then, becoming the placating voice he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. Look, if you want to join us for part of the time, that would be fine. Maybe the first week? The kids would love to see you. The condescension in his voice stung. Actually, I'll be in Italy during those weeks. I've booked a culinary tour, something I've wanted to do for years. Italy? By yourself? The disbelief in his voice only strengthened my resolve. Yes, Marcus, by myself. It turns out I'm not too old for that, even if I'm apparently too old for a family vacation. This is... He struggled. For words. Fair, I supplied. It's fair. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some packing to do. My Italian phrase book just arrived. I ended the call before he could respond, my heart pounding but my mind clearer than it had been in months. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not by others, but by myself. Over the next few days, my phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls from Marcus, Vanessa, and even Lily, my 17-year-old granddaughter who rarely contacted me except to thank me for birthday checks. I let most go to voicemail, needing time to solidify my newfound strength. When I finally answered Marcus's call nearly a week later, his tone had shifted from indignation to negotiation. Mom, we can work something out, he began without preamble. What if we take 2 weeks instead? Of 3? Or we could delay until August. I've already made my plans, Marcus, I replied. My trip is booked and non-refundable. Cancel it, he said, a hint of the entitlement that had colored our recent interactions creeping back into his voice. We'll pay the fees. This isn't about money. Then what is it about? He demanded. Punishing us? Making a point? I sighed, wishing he could understand without me having to spell it out. It's about respect, Marcus. It's about remembering that I'm still a person with feelings and desires, not just your mother who exists to make your life easier. There was a long pause before he spoke again, his voice quieter. We never meant to make you feel that way. Perhaps not deliberately, I conceded, but you did, and more importantly, you didn't even notice you were doing it. The conversation ended with an uneasy truce, Marcus reluctantly accepting that the beach house would not be available, and me agreeing to have dinner with the family the following weekend to talk things through. That dinner was tense, with Vanessa alternating between excessive politeness and pointed remarks about how disappointed everyone was about the change of plans. My grandchildren, barely looking up from their phones, seemed indifferent to the entire situation. Grandma's going to Italy, Lily said at one point, a hint of surprise in her voice as she glanced up from her screen. That's kinda cool, actually. Jason, 14 and in the full throes of adolescent apathy, shrugged. Whatever. The beach was getting boring anyway. Their casual dismissal of a tradition they'd supposedly cherished spoke volumes. This wasn't about meaningful family time. It was about convenience and entitlement. As the weeks passed and my departure date approached, a strange thing happened. Word spread through my small coastal community about my stand and my upcoming adventure. Sophia, my rental agent, took me out for lunch and raised a toast to Eleanor's rebellion. My neighbor Marta, a widow like me, asked for details about the cooking classes, wondering if she might book something similar. You've got guts, Ellie, she told me over coffee on my deck. Most of us just keep giving in, afraid of rocking the boat. I was afraid too, I admitted. But it turns out there are worse things than rocking the boat, like drowning quietly while the boat sails on without you. The morning of my departure arrived with perfect summer weather, sunshine streaming through my windows and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt water. I was zipping my suitcase when the doorbell rang. Marcus stood on my porch, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. "I came to drive you to the airport," he said. I hesitated, surprised by the gesture. "That's not necessary. I've already called a car service." "Please, Mom, let me do this." The drive to the airport was mostly silent, both of us unsure how to bridge the gulf that had opened between us. As we approached the terminal, Marcus finally spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said. About respect." He kept his eyes on the road. "I didn't see it before, but you were right. We've been taking you for granted." I waited, allowing him space to continue. "I got so used to you accommodating us that I stopped considering what you might want or need." He pulled up to the departures curb and turned to face me. "I'm sorry, Mom. Really sorry." The sincerity in his eyes touched me. "Thank you for saying that. When you get back," he continued, "I'd like to start fresh. Maybe we could spend some real time together, just you and me like we used to before Dad died." I felt a small crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. "I'd like that." As I stood in the terminal watching him drive away, I felt lighter somehow. This journey wasn't just about Italy or asserting control over my property. It was about reclaiming myself. About reminding my family, and perhaps more importantly myself, that Eleanor Davenport's story wasn't over yet. It was still being written, one bold chapter at a time. And as the plane lifted off, carrying me toward new experiences and horizons, I smiled at the thought of all the adventures still waiting for me on the other side of fear. Sometimes, it takes canceling someone else's plans to remember your own. Dreams have been on hold for far too long. The Italian sun felt different somehow. Warmer, more nourishing than the coastal rays I'd grown accustomed to in Cape Haven. As I settled into my room at the small family-owned villa just outside Florence, I couldn't help but marvel at the vibrant terracotta rooftops visible from my window, stretching toward distant hills lined with cypress trees. The scene looked like something from a postcard, yet here I was, experiencing it firsthand, rather than living vicariously through travel shows or my friends' social media posts. The culinary tour began the next morning with a market visit guided by Chef Paolo, a charming man in his 60s with laugh lines etched deeply around his eyes and flour perpetually dusting his forearms. He introduced our small group, 8 travelers from various corners of the world, to local vendors who greeted him like family, offering samples of aged pecorino and slices of prosciutto so thin they melted on the tongue. The secret to Italian. Cooking isn't complicated techniques, Paolo explained as we wandered through stalls bursting with produce. It's understanding ingredients, their seasons, their qualities. You must respect what the earth gives you. I found myself nodding, struck by how his philosophy applied to more than just food. How long had I been failing to respect what life was offering me, always putting my own desires aside to accommodate others? During our first cooking class, I paired with Diane, a retired professor from Chicago who had lost her husband 3 years earlier. As we kneaded pasta dough side by side, she confided that this trip was her first solo adventure since becoming a widow. "My children thought I was having some sort of breakdown when I booked it," she laughed, flour dusting her silver hair. "Apparently, grief has an expiration date, and after that, you're just supposed to be content watching your grandchildren grow up through FaceTime calls scheduled at their parents' convenience." Her words resonated so deeply that I found myself sharing my own story. The beach house, the overheard conversation, my decisive cancellation of my family's vacation plans. "Good for you," Diane said, eyes sparkling as she shaped a perfect tortellini. "It's about time they realized you're not just an accessory to their lives." Over the following days, our group bonded through shared meals and wine-fueled conversations that stretched late into the evening. There was Thomas, a retired architect traveling with his husband Carlos. Meredith, a recently divorced banker determined to rediscover joy. The Wilson sisters, both in their 70s, who had been traveling together annually for decades. And Jackson, a widower in his early 70s whose quiet wit often had us all in stitches. None of them found it odd that I was traveling alone at 68. None questioned my capabilities or suggested activities might be too strenuous for me. Instead, they invited me for impromptu evening strolls, saved me seats at demonstrations, and shared recommendations for hidden gems to explore during our free afternoons. One evening, as we dined in the villa's garden under string lights, surrounded by the heady scent of jasmine, Jackson raised his glass. To Eleanor, he toasted, who reminded us all that sometimes the most important journey is the one back to yourself. Glasses clinked, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Tuscan summer or the wine. These strangers-turned-friends saw me, truly saw me, in ways my own family had stopped doing years ago. I sent Marcus occasional postcards and brief text messages with photos of spectacular views or particularly successful dishes I'd prepared, but I kept our communications light, maintaining the boundary I'd established. His responses seemed carefully worded, as if he was still processing this new version of his mother, who set limits and prioritized her own happiness. 2 weeks into my trip, as we were preparing to leave Florence for the wine country, I received a longer message from him. The house feels strange without you. We found other accommodations for a short getaway next week. Nothing as nice as the beach house, but it's fine. Lily asked if you're coming back or if you've decided to become an Italian chef permanently. I think she misses you, though she wouldn't admit it. Stay safe, Mom. Your adventure looks amazing. I read the message several times, noticing what wasn't said as much as what was. No guilt trips, no demands for my return. Just a simple acknowledgement that things were different, and perhaps a dawning recognition that my absence was felt. In Piedmont, our days were filled with vineyard tours and wine tastings. I discovered I had a surprisingly good palate, able to detect subtle notes that others missed. Chef Paolo joked that I should consider becoming a sommelier as my second career. It's never too late to discover new talents, he said, and I found myself agreeing. During an afternoon break, I wandered through a small village near our accommodation, my camera hanging around my neck to capture the narrow cobblestone streets and window boxes overflowing with geraniums. I paused outside a small art gallery, drawn to a vibrant landscape painting displayed in the window. The gallery owner, an elegant woman named Francesca, invited me inside for an espresso when she noticed my interest. As we chatted, I mentioned offhandedly that I used to paint in college but had set it aside when marriage and motherhood took precedence. "And you never returned to it?" she asked, her expression suggesting this was incomprehensible. I shrugged. "Life gets busy. After my husband died, there was the beach house to manage, and somehow the days just filled themselves." Francesca shook her head. "But the artist inside you, she has been waiting all this time, no? Perhaps she is very patient, but why make her wait longer?" The question lingered with me as I rejoined my group for an evening cooking class. While preparing risotto, a dish that demands constant attention and care, I realized I had given so much attention to caring for others that I'd neglected to stir and nurture my own passions. That night, I sent an email to Sophia, my rental agent back home. "Could you check on something for me? The small studio space above Harborside Books, is it still available for rent? I've been thinking about setting up a painting space when I return." Her response came quickly. "Already on it, Ellie. The owner says it's yours if you want it. Should I tell them you'll take it? Also, you should see all the gossip you've generated in town. You're becoming something of a local legend among the over 60 crowd. Several ladies at my book club have suddenly started researching solo travel options." I laughed out loud, startling Jackson, who was reading nearby in the villa's common area. "Good news?" he asked, peering over his reading glasses. Just discovering I might have accidentally started a revolution back home, I replied, then found myself sharing Sophia's message and my plans to reclaim my artistic side. Jackson closed his book and leaned forward. You know, Eleanor, when my wife died, everyone had opinions about how I should live the remainder of my life. Most involved fading quietly into the background, becoming the grandfatherly figure who shows up for holidays and birthdays with gifts and a checkbook. That sounds familiar, I said, thinking of the role I'd reluctantly accepted. I went along with it for nearly 3 years, he continued. Then one morning, I woke up and couldn't remember the last time I'd done something purely because I wanted to. Not because it was expected, not because it would make someone else happy, but simply because it brought me joy. What changed? I asked. I bought a motorcycle, he said with a mischievous grin. A Triumph Bonneville T120. My daughter nearly had a heart attack when I rode it to her house for Sunday dinner. The image made me laugh. How did she react? She threatened to call my doctor to have my mental competency evaluated. He chuckled. But here's the thing about adult children. They adapt when they realize their tantrums won't change your mind. Now she brags to her friends about her cool dad with the vintage bike. I'm not sure Marcus will ever brag about his mother taking off to Italy and starting a painting studio, I mused. Jackson's eyes crinkled at the corners. Give him time, and more importantly, don't base your decisions on his reactions. That's the trap we fall into. Seeking approval for the lives we want to lead from the very people who benefit from us leading smaller ones. His words resonated deeply, and as our tour continued to the Amalfi Coast for its final week, I found myself standing straighter, speaking more confidently, and dreaming more expansively about the life waiting for me back home. I struck up conversations with locals, navigated public transportation without hesitation, and even went swimming in the Mediterranean despite Meredith's warning that the currents could be strong. I grew up on the Atlantic, I reminded her as I waded into the crystal blue water. This is practically a bathtub compared to the waves I body surfed as a teenager. On our last night in Italy, our group gathered for a farewell dinner at a cliffside restaurant overlooking the sea. Chef Paolo had arranged a special menu featuring dishes we had mastered throughout our journey. As the sun set in a spectacular blaze of orange and pink, painting the water below us in fiery hues, we exchanged contact information and promises to stay in touch. You must all come visit me in Cape Haven, I said impulsively. My beach house has plenty of room, and I make an excellent lobster bisque. I might take you up on that, Jackson replied, his eyes meeting mine with warmth that suggested our connection had grown beyond mere friendship. As we raised our glasses in a final toast, I realized how profoundly this trip had transformed me. I had arrived in Italy feeling wounded and defensive, determined to prove a point to my family. I was leaving with something far more valuable, a rediscovered sense of self and a vision for my future that was entirely my own. The flight home gave me time to reflect and prepare for re-entry into my regular life. I knew things couldn't simply return to how they had been before. I didn't want them to. The Eleanor who had left Cape Haven 3 weeks ago, the accommodating mother who swallowed hurt feelings and stepped aside to make room for everyone else's priorities, had been left behind in Italy. The woman returning was different, clearer about her boundaries, more confident in her worth, and excited about her own plans. I hadn't told Marcus exactly when I was coming home, so there was no one waiting at the airport when I landed. I took a taxi back to Cape Haven, watching familiar landmarks pass by with new eyes. When we pulled up to my beach house, I felt a momentary disorientation. Had it always been this beautiful, or was I just seeing it differently now? The taxi driver helped me with my luggage, and I tipped him generously, flush with the confidence of someone who had successfully navigated foreign countries alone. As I turned to unlock my door, I noticed something on the porch. A large canvas wrapped in brown paper with a note attached. Curious, I set down my bags to investigate. The note was from Marcus. "Welcome home, Mom. I saw this in a gallery last week and thought of you. It reminded me of the paintings you used to do when I was little, the ones that hung in Dad's office. I've missed your art. I've missed you. Call when you're settled. No rush." Intrigued, I carefully unwrapped the canvas to find a stunning seascape. Moody blues and grays capturing the Atlantic in winter. Reminiscent indeed of the style I'd once favored. My throat tightened at this unexpected gesture of understanding. Perhaps something had shifted for Marcus too during these weeks apart. Inside, the house was spotlessly clean, with fresh flowers on the kitchen table and a small welcome basket containing a bottle of Italian wine, local cheese, and a card signed by Sophia. "The prodigal rebel returns," the card read. "Can't wait to hear all about your adventures. Studio is confirmed. Keys inside envelope. Welcome home, brave friend." I unpacked slowly, integrating souvenirs from my trip into my living space. A hand-painted ceramic plate from Florence, a small watercolor of the Amalfi Coast, the apron chef Paolo had presented to each of us at the conclusion of our tour. Each item a tangible reminder that I had done something bold, something entirely for myself. The next morning, I woke early, my body still on European time. I made coffee and took it out to the deck, watching the sunrise over the ocean. My phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. Landed safely in Seattle, already missing Italian wine. And good company. "How's the re-entry going?" I smiled, typing back. "Just beginning. Coffee on my deck, planning my first day of freedom. Studio keys waiting. How's the time change treating you?" We exchanged a few more messages before I set my phone aside, wanting to fully absorb the beauty of the morning. This deck, this view, they had always been here, but somehow they felt like gifts I was receiving anew. Around mid-morning, I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I saw Marcus getting out, looking uncharacteristically nervous as he approached the door. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the boundaries I intended to maintain, then went to greet him. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, his relief evident. "You're really back." "I said I would be," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. He entered cautiously, as if unsure of his welcome. "How was Italy? You look different." "Good different or bad different?" I asked, genuinely curious about what he perceived. "Good," he said without hesitation. "You look rested, confident. I don't know. More like the mom I remember from when I was young, before Dad got sick." The observation surprised me. I hadn't realized how visible my transformation might be to others. "Italy was magnificent," I said, motioning for him to sit as I prepared more coffee. "I learned to make pasta from scratch, drank wine with views. You wouldn't believe, and remembered what it feels like to be more than just someone's mother or grandmother." Marcus winced slightly at that last part. "About that," he began, fidgeting with a coaster on the coffee table. "I owe you more than just an apology, Mom. The way we've been treating you, the way I've been treating you, it wasn't right." I waited, giving him space to continue. "When Dad died, you were so strong," he said, his voice growing more reflective. "You held everything together, made all the arrangements, handled the estate. You never fell apart like we expected. I think somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as someone who might be hurting or lonely or wanting things of your own. You became this fixture, reliable. Always there when we needed you, never asking for anything in return." "That was partly my fault," I acknowledged, setting a mug of coffee in front of him. "I was so afraid of being a burden that I made myself smaller, less demanding. I thought that was what you needed from me." "But it's not what you needed," he said, meeting my eyes directly. "I get that now." We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound, the distant crash of waves and the occasional call of seagulls. The beach house looks good, I finally said. Thank you for taking care of it. Actually, Marcus replied, looking slightly embarrassed, Vanessa did most of it. After you left and we had to cancel our plans, she felt really bad about everything. She spent a day cleaning and organizing before we found another rental. It was her idea to get you the painting as a welcome home gift. This surprised me. Vanessa had always seemed the more entitled of the pair, quick to accept my sacrifices as her due. Please thank her for me, I said, deciding to acknowledge the effort without erasing the hurt that had preceded it. You could tell her yourself, Marcus suggested tentatively. We'd love to have you over for dinner this weekend. Low-key, just family. Lily has been asking about your trip. I think your postcards actually made an impression. And Vanessa's trying out a new lasagna recipe she learned from a cooking show. Not as authentic as what you probably had in Italy, but I considered the invitation, weighing my desire to maintain my newfound independence against the possibility of reshaping our relationship on healthier terms. I'd like that, I decided. But I have plans on Saturday. I'm setting up my new art studio above Harborside Books. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. Art studio? You're painting again? I am, I confirmed. It's been too long. I remember your paintings from when I was a kid, he said, a smile softening his features. There was one of a lighthouse at sunset that hung in the hallway. I used to make up stories about the lighthouse keeper. I still have that one in storage, I told him, touched that he remembered. Maybe I'll hang it in the studio for inspiration. We talked for another hour, more openly than we had in years. There were still awkward moments, still vestiges of old patterns trying to reassert themselves, but beneath it all was a tentative foundation for something new, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation and assumption. When Marcus finally left, promising to confirm dinner details later in the week, I felt cautiously optimistic. The conversation hadn't erased the hurt or magically transformed our relationship, but it had created space for possibility. And right now, possibility was enough. I spent the rest of the day reacquainting myself with my home, unpacking the remainder of my luggage and sorting through 3 weeks of mail. Among the bills and flyers was a handwritten note from Marta, my neighbor. Welcome back, world traveler. The neighborhood has been buzzing with tales of your adventure and your stand against family expectations. You've become something of a local celebrity. Several of us are meeting at the Sandpiper on Thursday evening, a casual gathering of women, reclaiming their lives. Come join us if you're not too jet-lagged. 7 p.m. No RSVP needed. Just bring yourself and your Italian stories. The invitation both amused and intrigued me. Had my personal decision really resonated with so many others? I tucked the note into my purse, planning to attend if my energy levels permitted. The next day, I drove into town to pick up the keys for my studio. The owner of Harborside Books, a gentleman named Henry who had taken over the business from his mother a decade earlier, greeted me warmly. Eleanor Davenport, returning conquering hero, he said with a twinkle in his eye as he handed me the keys. Sophia tells me you're going to be painting up there. That's the plan, I confirmed, though I'm a bit rusty after all these years. Rusty just means you need oil, he quipped. And speaking of oil, I took the liberty of having the space cleaned and stocked with some basic supplies. Consider it a welcome gift from a fellow artist. I hadn't known Henry was an artist himself, though it explained the carefully curated selection of art books his store always featured. That's incredibly thoughtful, I said, genuinely moved. I'd love to see your work sometime. Perhaps an exchange, he suggested. Your new pieces for my old ones. The town could use a fresh perspective. As I climbed the narrow staircase to the studio space, I felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with nervousness. Would the skills I'd once been so confident in return easily, or would I be starting from scratch? The door at the top opened to reveal a sun-drenched space with wide windows overlooking the harbor. Previous tenants had left behind an easel and a sturdy work table. Henry's basic supplies turned out to be a generous selection of high-quality paints, brushes, and canvases arranged neatly on a shelf. I walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, already envisioning how I would organize it, where the best light would fall at different times of day. This space was mine, not shared, not borrowed, not contingent on anyone else's approval or schedule. My hands itched to start creating immediately. Back at home that evening, I received another text from Jackson. "Studio secured? Ready to unleash? Your inner artist?" "Studio is perfect," I replied. "Light, space, harbor views. Starting Saturday." "Excellent," he texted back. "By the way, my daughter has invited me to her beach house in Oregon next month. Apparently my European adventure has elevated my cool factor, and now the grandkids want to hear all about Italy from Grandpa Jack directly." Funny how a little independence changes their perception, isn't it? I smiled at the parallel to my own situation. Very funny indeed. Enjoy the elevated status while it lasts. "It's not the status I'm enjoying," came his reply. "It's the respect. Long overdue from both them and myself." His words resonated deeply. Respect. That was exactly what had been missing, not just from my family, but from my relationship with myself. For too long, I'd accepted the diminished role assigned to me, forgetting that I was still entitled to dreams, adventures, and self-determination. Thursday evening arrived, and despite lingering jet lag, I decided to attend the gathering at the Sandpiper. The casual waterfront restaurant had been a Cape Haven fixture for decades, known for its fresh seafood and relaxed atmosphere. As I approached, I spotted Marta waving from a large table on the deck where about a dozen women were already seated. "She's here!" Marta called out as I approached. "Our inspiration has arrived!" I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment as several women I recognized from around town turned to greet me with enthusiastic waves and calls of welcome. Some were casual acquaintances, the librarian, a retired teacher who volunteered at the community garden, the owner of the local bakery. Others were familiar faces whose names I couldn't immediately recall. "We've saved you a seat of honor," Marta said, patting the chair beside her. "These ladies have been dying to hear about your Italian adventure and your magnificent stand against being sidelined." I laughed nervously as I sat down. "I'm afraid it's been greatly exaggerated. I just took a cooking tour and rearranged some rental dates." "Don't diminish it," said Patricia, the silver-haired librarian. "You stood up for yourself when your family tried to relegate you to the margins. That takes courage at any age, but especially after years of putting everyone else first." Glasses of wine appeared, and I found myself sharing the unfiltered version of my story, the hurt of overhearing my son's dismissive comments, the bold decision to claim the beach house. For myself, the transformative weeks in Italy, and the tentative reconnection with Marcus upon my return. "The most surprising part," I confided, "is how differently I see myself now. For years I've been defining myself by my relationships to others. Richard's widow, Marcus's mother, Lily and Jason's grandmother. In Italy, I was just Eleanor, a woman with opinions and talents and desires of her own." Nods of recognition circled the table. Each woman had her own story of invisibility, of being taken for granted, of having her worth measured by what she could provide rather than who she was. "I spent 30 years managing a department at the hospital," shared a woman named Gloria, whom I remembered from community board meetings. "The day after I retired, my son called asking if I could start picking up my grandchildren from school. Every day because it's not like you're doing anything else now. My daughter suggested I sell my house and move into her basement apartment after my husband died," added another woman. "When I said I preferred my own home, she told me I was being selfish because they could use the money from my house sale to upgrade to a bigger property. Story after story emerged, each reflecting the common experience of women who had reached a stage of life where they were expected to fade into supportive background roles, their own desires and identities secondary to everyone else's needs. "So, what did you do?" I asked Gloria about her son's request for daily school pickups. She smiled mischievously. "I enrolled in master's program in art history, something I'd always wanted to study. Classes 3 afternoons a week. Can't pick up the kids if I'm in lecture, can I?" Laughter erupted around the table, followed by other tales of small rebellions and reclaimed independence. Patricia had sold her suburban home and bought a tiny cottage by the sea, ignoring her children's protests about wasting their inheritance. Marta had begun dating again at 72, enjoying the company of a gentleman friend with no interest in remarriage. Another woman had taken up competitive swimming, traveling to meets across the country. "The funny thing is," Marta observed, swirling the wine in her glass, "once our families realize we're serious about having our own lives, most of them adjust. They might grumble at first, but they adapt." "And those who don't?" I asked, thinking of families less receptive than mine had ultimately been. "Those relationships were probably troubled to begin with," Patricia said gently. "You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they're perfectly capable of building their own heat." As the evening progressed,